Welcome to your online coffee break, where we discuss bite-sized topics that inspire, educate, and entertain. Here's your host, a software innovator, award-winning marketer, and astronomy and space buff, Chuck Fields.
Hello, thanks for joining me today for your online coffee break. Today, I'd like to welcome my special guest, Stephen Hall. Stephen is a co-founder of Tinker Coffee, a specialty coffee roaster located in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, a lot of our listeners, including me, are huge coffee fans, but many of us don't know much about exactly how coffee came about, or how to brew the best cup, or how to find the best roast. We decided to change all that today by diving deeper into coffee and going on-site to Tinker Coffee to learn how the pros do it.
Online coffee break.
Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
It is an honor. Now, Tinker Coffee, right here in Indianapolis. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about how it was founded, being a co-founder?
Yeah, so my brother-in-law and I, Jeff, started the business in pretty early 2014. We kind of hatched the idea, I guess. We knew we wanted to do some sort of business together, and Jeff had really developed a great passion for specialty coffee and had kind of introduced me to specialty coffee along the way. So when we were talking about, what kind of business we could do, we thought, well, geez, we like coffee a lot. There's this, it felt like there was a real opportunity in town because no one was really doing specialty coffee the way, we had talked about wanting to do it. So we thought this is a great fit. We can combine our passion for coffee in a place that hasn't really been exposed to specialty coffee yet. And we just kind of dove in head first and started the business officially in November of 2014.
And it's been fantastic ever since. Now, you mentioned specialty coffee. So just give a general description. What makes specialty coffee? What's the general definition of that?
Yeah, it's, there's a lot of coffee out there in the world. A lot of coffee goes into Folgers cans and Maxwell House and, all that. But kind of the upper echelon of coffee that's grown at, really high altitude and under great, really well-controlled growing conditions and is cared for kind of throughout the process. That is specialty coffee. It's coffee that's been objectively graded by Q graders, which is kind of the coffee version of a sommelier, to a certain point. Generally, the coffees we buy are generally scored around 85 to, 90, let's say 92 points. So that's kind of the top tier of coffee is considered specialty coffee.
Wow. And then, as I understand, your website is amazing. You have this, the history of coffee, you have the regions around the world. As I understand, Africa is sort of the home to where coffee was rumored to have been born. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story? Where does coffee come from?
Yeah, so coffee originated in Ethiopia. That's where it's found growing kind of naturally. It's naturally occurring. So the big story with coffee is that, Kaldi, the goat herder, he noticed that all the goats that were eating cherries from this particular tree would then get all energetic after eating the cherries. And, that kind of turned him on to something. And somehow, some way, as the story goes, the cherries were then put into a fire somehow, and the beans, the cherry, the seed of the cherry, which is the coffee bean itself, was actually, roasted and then somehow was ground and put into a beverage somehow, some way. I don't know, I don't know the connection between, the goats and the actual cup of coffee, but that's the story. So that, this beverage was created kind of almost by accident, and that the goats were really energetic when they ate it. So
wow, and that was, I think it was like something like 850 AD, which is just amazing to me. Yeah. Thank God that happened. God bless the goats out there. One question I did want to ask: we're sitting here in your warehouse with all these coffee beans from around the world. How on earth do you select your coffee beans from the various regions?
Yeah, we spend a ton of time sourcing coffee, and actually Austin, who's back there in the green coffee, he's one of the main guys that helps identify the coffees that we're ultimately going to buy. So what we do, and actually the sample roaster's on right now. Actually, if we want to take a quick look at it, we can.
All right, we're walking to the sample roaster right now.
Yeah. So what Austin's doing here is he's got a brand new coffee, actually. From a fresh harvest coffee from our importer called Catalyst Coffee that they just source in Ethiopia. And basically what he's doing now is just warming up the sample roaster here. This is, as you can see, basically just a miniature version of this larger machine. And what we do is we take a few hundred grams of coffee, we sample roast it, we get it, roasted light, pretty light, just so we can see kind of what the coffee's got going on. And then we actually cup the coffee that we've sample roasted and decide what we like or dislike about it. And the coffees that we fall in love with are the ones that we ultimately buy the giant, 150-pound bags of.
Wow. Now you mentioned something about cupping the coffee, and
I'm going back in here just to let Austin.
And I understand that you actually have cupping classes on this, but what does that mean, actually cupping the coffee? Is it just sampling it? What does that mean?
Yeah, cupping is it's really like the standard way by which coffee is evaluated. So we take, in our situation, we take 14 grams of coffee, we grind it up in this little bowl. It's basically, imagine like a cup of soup, kind of that, size bowl. So we grind up the 14 grams, we smell the coffees, we get a sense for the dry aromatics. Then we pour hot water over the coffee, let it start brewing. As that's happening, we're smelling it. After a certain amount of time, we scoop the grounds off the top of that cup, let the coffees cool down a little bit more, and then slurp the coffees and taste it and actually kind of bring the whole sensory experience together. So that cupping, we like you said, we host classes here a couple times, once or twice a month generally. And it's just a really fun way for people to experience coffee in that way, understand how we quality control, how we decide what we're going to buy, going through that entire process with us. So
that would be so fascinating. And as I understand, you guys actually have some awards that you won for your coffee. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Yeah. So we submitted several coffees to the Golden Bean competition this year, which is an annual competition held every year in Portland. And basically you submit coffees in categories. So we submitted coffee for the espresso blend category, the milk-based espresso, so lattes, cappuccinos, single origin espresso, and then pour over and filter. So kind of just a brewed coffee category. And we won 4 medals in that competition, 4 bronzes. Hopefully, silver and gold is next year, but we were still really happy. I mean, we won an award in every category we entered, so we're really happy with that.
Congratulations on that too. I did have kind of an off the wall question too. Obviously, the goat story, the goat's going crazy over the caffeine. Where does decaf coffee come from? Any idea how that comes about?
Yeah, so decaf coffee, the coffees that we buy for decaf are generally decaffeinated with a compound called ethyl acetate, which is a byproduct of sugarcane production, basically. It's a naturally compound, non-chemical compound, but basically the way that decaffeinated coffee is decaffeinated is it's first, of course, regular coffee that's then steamed to kind of let the pores open up and kind of make it a little bit easier to pull the caffeine out. Then the coffee is soaked in a solution of water and ethyl acetate that, again, kind of pulls that caffeine out of the coffee. Once that has been successfully done and the caffeine is successfully removed, the coffee is then steamed again to remove any trace of any of the the ethyl acetate or anything that you don't want in coffee. You kind of just want to go back to the original just pure coffee bean. And then it's let dry and you've got decaffeinated coffee. So it's a pretty interesting process. It's kind of crazy that someone figured out how to do that. But yeah, I mean, generally the coffees that we buy, as I mentioned, ethyl acetate is a nice natural way to decaffeinate coffee. A Swiss water process is another really interesting way to decaffeinate coffee. And those are the ones we generally would always buy.
See, one thing that I loved the first time I met you is we were talking about decaf coffee, and I would love if I could drink coffee all the time. I would, and of course I have some caffeine in the morning, but I usually limit myself to 2 cups there. And I mentioned decaf coffee, and you're like, yeah, the people who really love coffee want to keep drinking it. That's a great option for just evening a lot. But you have some great coffees. Can you tell us, where does your most popular house coffee? Where does that come from? What region? And
yeah, so actually we just got one of our most popular coffees in last week. So we have 2 coffees that we've purchased year after year. This one is from Peru. It's from a collective called Ruta del Inca. We just love Peruvian coffees because they can tend to have a lot of really great, almost like French toasty kind of taste. So maybe a little nutmeg, a little buttery mouthfeel, nice like maple syrupy kind of sweetness to it. It's just a wonderful coffee, and we love buying that coffee every year. So as you can see, we just have 10 bags here. We have a lot more that's stored at other warehouses, and we kind of can get them at 10 or 20 bag intervals, just to so we're not taking up the entire green room with one coffee. But we tend to keep this coffee around for 3 to 6 months out of the year. And then we have another coffee from Malawi that we've purchased for the past 3 years that we also try to keep around for about 6 months. So
That's fascinating. Now, the one thing I do wonder too is obviously you have different coffee beans from all over the place. Do you all roast them the same, or do they all each have their own special roasting recipe? How does that work?
Yeah, every coffee is roasted differently. Certain coffees have different densities. Just the makeup of the actual varietal of coffee tree that the cherry comes from, behaves differently in the roaster. So yeah, I mean, we have a general idea of how we want to roast a coffee from the start. We know kind of where we would begin, like from a baseline in the roasting process. And then once we do that first roast, we're able to cup the coffees and say, okay, I like this about it, I dislike that about this roast. Let's make some changes, to time, to temperature, you name it.
And you use this. We're now standing in front of this beautiful roaster.
Yeah.
How does this work in general? I've never seen one of these. This is amazing.
Yeah, so this is a Loring S35 Kestrel roaster. So the way this machine actually works is in this cyclone here, it's fed by gas, and a nice, real hot flame is produced in this cyclone that then circulates the hot air up this tower and then down through this little S pipe here that sends the hot air into the drum as it's spinning around. So it's kind of like a convection oven. And this roaster is works a little bit differently than the Probat that we first started the company on. That roaster was a direct fire roaster. So it had a row of about 3 burners that had, gas, almost like your gas range in your stove at home. Those rows of burners were actually heating up a cast iron drum that was spinning around. So again, it was direct fire, like heat on the roaster, where this is, of course, using hot air to generate the roast. So they work a little bit differently. This machine is super energy efficient. It's a kind of a closed loop system in that the hot air goes through the drum, it circulates, and then it gets passed back up through into the cyclone, basically, again, where it's refiltered and then sent back through. So you just have, again, like a closed loop system that doesn't require a ton of energy to heat up the air all the time. And you also have really clean air that's being sent into the drum for the roasting process. So we love this machine.
I was gonna say, I know it's different as you said, but roughly, like, how long does it take when you take the green beans in here and they come out as a finished product? How long does that typically take?
It generally only takes us about 10 to 12 minutes per roast. Yeah, and that's our roast style. Every roaster is different. A lot of the inputs that people would put into a roast process are, how hot the roaster is when you start the process, how long the coffee is in the drum itself, how you apply heat throughout the roasting process. All of those factors adjust or affect that time. But for us, in the light to medium range, 10 to 12 minutes.
Wow. How did you learn that? Was it just trial and error, or just how do you learn how to roast the perfect coffee bean?
A lot of trial and error. Yeah, I mean, when Jeff and I first turned on the Probat in the old space, when we first got started, that was the first time we'd ever roasted coffee, first time we'd ever touched the machine. And a lot of it was just roasting coffee 10 pounds at a time, understanding how we were applying heat, reading as much as we could. Scott Rao is a really influential person for us in coffee roasting, and he's written a really influential book called The Coffee Roaster's Companion that spells out a lot of the principles of coffee roasting, helping you understand what chemically is happening, when you're roasting coffee, and how to apply heat in a way that develops the coffee, doesn't bake it, doesn't burn it, all those things. But yeah, just trial and error for us, just learning and absorbing as much as we could through YouTube and reading and practice.
See, and I think that's fascinating too, because I think you go through all this process to come up with the perfect roasted bean, which I have to say I've really enjoyed taking your coffee. I just love it. But there's a whole other side of the process. It's for those of us at home to how we're preparing the coffee. And one thing I love about your website is you actually describe different methods from French roast French press, excuse me, to other types of that. What types of ways should they make their, coffee at home? What's the best way to do that?
I would say, honestly, whatever you like is the best way. There's no, for me, I use a nice drip coffee maker at home. I have a nice grinder, though, like the nice grinder will help. You can make a great cup of coffee in a Mr. Coffee with a great grinder and a little bit of attention to detail. It's not to say that you've got to have a super expensive machine to make a really good cup. You just have to know how to adjust the things that will ultimately wind up with a good cup.
See, that's great to know. And now what about the beans themselves? I've heard different ways of, you got to get them, you grind them fresh and use them right away. Is there a way to preserve the bean? Like if we bought roasted beans, would we put them in the freezer? Would we put them in the refrigerator, slow things down? Or do you just want to buy the quantity that you're going to go through in, say, 2 weeks to a month?
Yeah, we would say keep it simple. Only buy as much coffee as you're going to go through in 2 weeks. That's really the best way to do it. If you want to get super crazy or technical, we have had coffee that has come from overseas or elsewhere that we wanted to hold on to for a while. And you can, put coffee in a vacuum sealed pack and put it in your freezer, and that will stop the aging process. You can hold on to coffee for a long time when you do that. You just have to be careful. You don't want to, of course, put coffee in the freezer, bring it out, put it back in. You don't want that like thawing and refreezing. That'll introduce some, moisture to the coffee that you don't want. But yeah, if you have the ability to vacuum seal coffee, if you find a coffee that you love and you want to save 100 or 200 grams just for that special occasion, and you've got a vacuum sealer, you could do that and come back to it a year later, and it should be just as good as it was.
That is a fantastic tip. Now, again, we are here on location in this beautiful facility that you literally just moved into recently. Can you tell us just about that, and what are your plans for the rest of 2019?
Yeah, so we moved into this building officially about mid-December of 2018. This was a warehouse from an eyewear company before we were lucky enough to get the space, and it's it's the right size space for us. We've got a ton of room, of course, for a new roaster, for all the tech stuff we're working on, all the brewers that are in need of some love, and we'll eventually be doing all our cold brewing here. Of course, we have a lot of room for production. We were able to pull the van in and load the van up and get it out the door. So there's just the right amount of space here for us now. And eventually, we will be working on building out our own cafe in kind of the north warehouse. We've got another about 3,000 square feet that's just on the other side of this cinder block wall that we will turn into our flagship cafe. So we're really excited about that. We haven't had a cafe of our own yet, and we're pretty psyched to be able to, maybe even buy some little coffee, coffees that are a little bit maybe off the wall and serve them to people, that we haven't had the opportunity to do before. So,
Steve, that sounds fantastic. Listen, I just want to congratulate you on the success so far of Tinker Coffee, and they can find out more about you at your website, which is tinkercoffee.com.
Tinkercoffee.com. You got it. Yep.
Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Online coffee break.
Wow, I really enjoyed our on-site tour at Tinker Coffee today with Steve. I want to thank him for joining us today. If you'd like to find out more about Tinker Coffee, just go to their website, tinkercoffee.com. I want to thank you for joining us today as well. If you'd like to comment on today's topic, just go to our website, onlinecoffeebreak.com, or give us a call at 317-862-4700. We'd also love it if you'd follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Online Coffee Break. And we'd also love it if you'd share this episode with your friends or leave us a review on your favorite podcast application. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you next time. God bless.